just heard from Lori, Models for Change is shifting into new facets of projects and building on work in the field to broaden and deepen MFC innovations. This is a critical juncture for Models for Change. We're focusing on our messaging and storytelling can really help us move from our engaged community to a wider juvenile justice audience. We have assembled here together a panel of experts who are all working with the Foundation on strategies for engaging and promoting the work of MFC. We'll hear from each of them and on their unique approaches and collaborations with the Foundation. Their bios are enclosed in the materials. I'd like to start to my far left with Shadi Salahi. She is the Executive Director of Active Voice and a communication strategist who uses film, television, and multimedia to spark change. I was privileged to see a screening last night of the film Zero Tolerance, and Shadi's going to speak about that a little bit later, and we're going to have a film clip for everybody to see. It was a very, very moving work. Leslie Kearns, to my right, is the Senior Vice President at M&R Strategic Services. And M&R has been working with the Foundation since 2010 on a multi-state effort to target legislators to pass juvenile justice reforms. And finally, we have Catherine Miller from Hadaway Communications. Catherine is the Managing Director at Hadaway and has been working with the Foundation to create a clear and compelling narrative on Models for Change and to help develop a strategy for communications. So we'll start with Leslie. Leslie, can you share with us some of the efforts that M&R has been working on the multi-state efforts and the upcoming national campaign?
Sure. Well, I'll let my colleagues who are really the experts on the multi-state, the national campaign, get in more details. But we've been working with MacArthur, as you mentioned, for a couple of years now, and we've been moving, I think we're moving into another 8 or so states, so a lot of successes in actually passing reforms. And what we, early on when Donald Ross and I first met with Julie and with Lori, we really talked about initially, how do we get at the message around Models for Change and really change the way people are thinking about this? And we looked at it initially as a PR campaign. And as we started to discuss it a little bit more in detail, we realized that it wasn't right now, it wasn't then about a PR effort, that really what was necessary is thinking about all the work from Models for Change, how do we actually push some of that work forward and pass more reforms in different states to really show that it wasn't just Models for Change and it ended, but that the lessons there could be learned and passed and used in different states to actually pass real reforms. So it moved from doing PR to really thinking about it from a national perspective, trying to reach a goal that the Foundation had set, was that we want to have reform in 75% of the states. And so I kind of stepped aside, and the reform work really went forward in the states. And then in the last year, when it felt right, we started then talking about, well, how then, what's that next step look like? So now that we've succeeded with Models for Change, we have the advocates who really know how to actually do reforms and share best practices. We're passing reforms now in even more states. How do we talk about this issue? So our effort that we've been working on over the last year is not being duplicating in what the national campaign is doing, which is really reaching state lawmakers to actually pass reforms, nor is it really about doing what Models for Change has done and the legacy work that Catherine was involved in, which is about making sure that the advocates are truly set up to push forward reforms and advocate for those reforms. So we started thinking through, what's that third prong really look like? So what's our role in helping with communications, this goal, this bigger objective of 75% reform in the states? And we started to think about, well, what's the right theory of change here? So if we have the lawmakers who are being targeted, and if we have the advocates who are prepared to push forward reform, if we want those forms to be sustainable and long term, then we need others to think about this issue. Others being those who should care or do care about this and can actually do something about it. And we're defining that as young people between ages of 18 and 24, because they were once a kid and still kind of are kids. They care about social justice issues. They're passionate about it. They probably know a lot of people who are young and are potentially either in or could be in the system, and also families, particularly parents of kids of age who could be impacted by it. They should care about this issue, and they can actually do something about this issue. They're voters. They could actually do something, and they could become advocates potentially. So our effort is really set up to try to raise awareness. One, that there is this problem that when kids who do come into the system, there are bad consequences that occur that jeopardizes not only their lives then as kids, but also their future lives. And really building, we were actually inspired by the legacy work, looking at how do we talk about this issue. And we were really struck by a fact, and we can always play with the numbers, but 10% of kids who are arrested for serious violent crimes. But the other 90% who still are touched by the system are still serve the same fate, whether that's because they're moved into a center that's far away from their homes and their families and their communities, or because it's on their record and it's hard to get to college and to get a job, or because they don't really get the services and support they need when they're in the system or touched by the system to actually become those healthy adults we want them to become good members of their community. So our effort is built to build awareness around that fact, that simple fact, that the 10%, we should treat kids as kids, but we should also remember those majority of kids need other kinds of support. But also using storytelling then to pivot, to not just talk about the problem, but pivot to talk about the work that all of you have done. That we don't have to settle for this. We don't have to settle for policies that treat kids uniformly, one-size-fits-all approach. We do have good lessons, we do have good reforms, and we could do better, and we are doing better. So pivot to using storytelling and products and the work of all of you to actually talk about what are the better ways of doing this. So we want to show both. We want to reach these different audiences, these new audiences in different ways, raising awareness, which I'll talk about more if we have time, through an online engagement, but also pivoting to talk about reforms that are occurring and could be occurring more if we gave them that support through traditional storytelling and media relations.
So that's interesting. So you mentioned that the online presence. Social media played a role. Can you talk about just a little bit how the social media played a role? And we also have some social media slides that we are going to be showing throughout the presentation so that you folks can get involved in that as well.
Sure. So the online the awareness effort will be largely living online through a creative storytelling project, and we're calling it Mistakes Kids Make, with the primary message being the mistakes we make as kids shouldn't jeopardize the rest of our lives, and trying to get it connect with people by telling a story in something that they can understand. It's not a story collection or a story sharing, but a storytelling. We want to take them through that story of what it's like when you make a mistake, and that what it's like now if you are served a sentence or served some kind of sentence around with a policy of one size fit all, and try then to show the other side of the story of what if we actually did do better by our kids? What if we actually use better policies that treat kids individually? And so the way we're going to use the story, a couple different creative products. One, we're developing a video that shows a trajectory about when a kid is served with something one size fit all versus the way we could actually do better. So it's a somewhat of a vague kid, so we don't really get into race or gender, ethnicity, but really showing it so that it could be any kid. It could be your kid, it could be your brother, it could be your sister, it could be the kid in your community, it could have been you when you were younger, and that we could do better. And using social media as a way of really to distribute that video. And our goal is simple actions that people can take, and the simple action being watch the video and pass that video on to somebody else. And working with not just the juvenile justice community, but thinking about other partners, affinity groups who we're already working with to some extent, but not just children's groups, but parent groups and family organizations. Again, people who could and should care about this issue and actually do something about it. So we're using a video. And then the site, Mistakes Kids Make, lives largely on an online microsite. And it takes people, again, through a story, through different prompts. Prompts being questions, such as, when you were a kid, did you ever, and giving a list of things, a little quiz. And when you answer that quiz, it then takes you to an answer that shows you what it would have been like, how many other people answered that question, and then what could have happened to you when you were younger if you actually been caught, or if you actually were served with something from a policy one size fit all. And several different kinds of prompts. You can then share that information, share that story, all of it using social media. So it lives on the site. We interact with Facebook in particular, and then using Twitter as a way of communicating both our answers as well as in sharing things like the video and other products that will be living on the site.
We'll come back a little bit later and talk about maybe some of the feedback that you've gotten and some of the results from that. I want to turn to Shadi for a moment and talk about the film that we screened last night that was made. Shadi has a clip that she's going to talk about that we're going to set up.
Yeah, we can go ahead and get started with the clip first.
I pretty much grew up camping. We would go on trips up to like Lake Jean and state forest and stuff around here. I couldn't wait. I never slept the day before when we would go. I'd already be packed up. My favorite thing about camping was actually just being with my family. It was time spent with them. I would believe it was a normal childhood. I mean, I did everything that every kid would do, except when I turned 14, it just went downhill. I got some trouble. I bought a moped. My parents bought it for me. It ended up to be stolen. They paid $250 for it. I got it. I had it for 2 weeks. Yeah, I think like 2 weeks. And then I guess someone saw me riding it and recognized it, and the cops came to my house. They read the serial numbers or something, and it came up stolen. I never did anything. It just so happened to be that I bought something that was stolen.
The judge said, what this appears to be is parents that have lost control of a child. And he said, I think it's time for me to get this child back in control. And he said, Camp Adams, 90 days. They shackled my son and took him away. They should not do that. They should not do that at all in front of a parent. That was the most horrible thing.
So this was just a small clip of obviously a larger film. Shadi, if you could explain to us a little bit about the process and then talk to us about who's going to see this film and what are some of the campaign tools that will be used to disseminate this film throughout the community.
Sure, and just to step back a little bit, that's just one little tidbit, but it really speaks to the reason why we all do this work, and it kind of gets to that piece of the hearts and minds. So moving people, kind of connecting the issues that we all work on every day with these personal family stories. And that's really kind of the heart of the way we want to approach our effort with this upcoming film, Zero Tolerance. And it really is true to what Models for Change is all about. I mean, you know, what we've heard so far this morning is the importance of various entities coming together, the importance of consensus building, and sometimes it really takes, to tackle social problems, really requires those opportunities for people to connect. And one thing that we really see in using film from Active Voices' perspective is that it really does create a unique opportunity for people of different perspectives to come together and have those conversations and build the relationships that can lead to lasting, measurable change. And one thing to think about when talking about communications in a social issue context, we know that storytelling and film isn't going to do anything on its own. What's particularly exciting is the opportunity of integrating these kinds of stories in the work that you all do, not only on an internal level, but also on an external level. So what we're going to be doing with this film is, it's going to be released nationally. That raises a lot of opportunities to raise the kind of public profile of these issues, and that's something that we want to capitalize on and something that we really want to kind of think about in the way that it allows for us to have a common text as a movement that can really give this work a context that people can really grab onto. And you think about certain films that have had real potential in moving forward various movements, and An Inconvenient Truth, everyone in this room has heard of that film. What that film did for the environmental movement is something that we really want to think about and tap into in terms of what is possible with a film like this that will be out there. I think we're at a really pivotal moment in this work. There is so much tremendous work being done in this room, so many amazing successes. Now is the time to really begin to move to the next level and really thinking about who are the new audiences that can be a part of this conversation? How can we really broaden and deepen this work and pull people in who may not necessarily think that these are issues that affect them? And something that comes out in this film is that it taps into values and real emotions that anyone can relate to, anyone who has a family can relate to. And those moments are things that we will be tapping into as part of this campaign. From a practical standpoint, again, we know this film will be out there, it'll be getting people's attention, it'll be generating some press. I think that creates opportunities to link up with the other communications activities that are happening so that there is this common narrative that we all have, but really also thinking more practically and how this can actually become a tool that is being used in the work that you all do. And I'm so struck by the amazing coalition building work that's happened, and it's great to see a movement like Models for Change, how effective that has been, and we know that takes time. What we want to do is work with folks like you all on the ground who are doing this work, that are looking for ways to pull in others into the conversations and the problem solving that you're working on. This can be that tool to do so. And we really think, too, as the film is gaining more attention, it can be an opportunity for people to pay attention and see, oh, well, maybe this is something that I should be a part of. You think about the various sectors that need to be a part of a long-term movement for change. We think about, how can media and storytelling not only be an opportunity to pull those various sectors together and give people a reason to come together and have a conversation, but then also, how can each sector use that as a tool to expand the circles in which we work. And we're going to be working very closely and not in a vacuum. We want to be thinking about what is already happening and how can this be that tool to further advance that coalition building and also raise the public profile of the work and the reason behind why everyone in this room is doing the work that they do.
Shadi, are there some companion tools that go along with this film that would be available for folks in our community to use?
Absolutely, and we know full-length film can't touch upon everything and can't do everything. One of the things that we want to create is a shorter version of the film that will be a 30-minute version, 20 to 30-minute version. And this is all part of a campaign supported by MacArthur Foundation. So we will be rolling this out starting in 2013. So there will be a shorter piece that we want to empower organizations and communities to use to engage different target audiences. There will be a discussion guide that taps into the various themes that come up in the film. There will also be a website where there will be various clips available on the website for different use and different themes that come up in the film. And we'll also be piloting activities using the film in key states around the country to really test out various ways that this story can actually be a tool to take the work that's happening to the next level.
Great, thank you. So let's turn to Catherine for a moment. Catherine, we mentioned that you have been working with the foundation on creating coherent and clear messages. And I personally had the benefit of working with Hadaway and can tell you that the work they do is great. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the work that you've done with the foundation and what you see as sort of the ongoing legacy work?
Yeah, sure. To take us a little bit of a step back, I usually get called in to work with foundations when they have a really complicated issue that wants to go to the next level. And they have a lot of really smart, intelligent experts who spend a lot of time talking to each other. And telling stories to one another about what is working. And that was essentially what happened here. And so MacArthur very dynamically said, we need to figure out how to take this to the next level. And we spend a lot of time throwing around the word legacy, and I, in some ways, would like people to forget the word legacy. Because what you are moving towards is the next wave of reform, as Lori mentioned. And what we realized in our work to develop not only clear messaging was that we needed consistent messaging across the field. That when you're in a crowded policy marketplace, there are a lot of little ant trails that go into state legislative offices, and a lot of little ant trails of activists that go into the governor's office, and a lot of little ant trails that go into the congresspeople's offices here in Washington. And if all of those people, even with all of their great intentions from the same field, are saying inconsistent things, that causes great confusion. These are really busy people. And so what we tried to do, and Leslie alluded to it, was come up with a new frame to help you all talk about it. Some of you saw it a few months ago, but the biggest principle behind it was actually putting the kids back into the picture. We spend a lot of time talking about system reform, right, to each other, but there were no kids in this picture. We had forgotten who we were working for. And I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. You guys work with these kids and their families every day, and you know their stories. But we were forgetting to tell them. And so one of the recommendations that we had after talking to many of you, after talking to some of the folks that you are seeking to influence, was also not only tell me about the kid, but tell me what works. I have priorities that I have to get. I have conflicting budgets. I have fiscal cliffs that I'm about to fall off of, right? How can I justify this over all of these other things, right? Or as the great panel from Louisiana, and it's always hard to follow a panel from Louisiana, a group of natural-born storytellers, especially traffic tickets. I'm now, but we needed to be able to explain in simplistic terms to people who are not experts, people who don't spend every day doing this, that these things that you have been working on for the last 7 years, for the last 20 years, for the last 50 years actually do work, right? And then we had to think about how policymakers and others would respond to that. And a lot of that was around, does it save me money? Is this cost effective? That may seem callous and cold, but it's true. Then we had to figure out, wait, why should I care about this, right? So that's putting the kid back in the picture. I'm a mom, I'm a godmother, I'm a father, I'm a brother. All of a sudden, can I see these kids, right? And the third was really about, and now I just blanked on the third, because that's what happens when you start.
Stepping on messages?
It was stepping on messages, and that piece, and that was really this idea of who were these kids? And as Leslie alluded to, the idea of the 10% of kids. Now, there are a lot of kids that do really bad things that aren't just mistakes. And there are a lot of people out there that will talk about developmental psychology, many of you in the room, and all the things that we need to do. But the idea was to help you visualize who this kid was. And so this kid who was a part of the film, who buys stolen property, doesn't steal the property, and then goes to 90 days, and the impact of that on his life, right, or her life, and how that changes the decisions moving on. So we've done some message work, and we've also been working with Leslie and Shadi and a lot of you to also figure out how all this works together. That these aren't actually disjointed efforts, right? It is not just a national campaign and a Mistakes Kids Make campaign. It's not just a film that we're putting out there. It's not just legacy work. But there's actually one big movement sitting in this room. All of you are communicating every day to people. And so how do we make that easier for you to do that? What are the tools that we can give you in consistent messaging? What are the actions that we can give you for your engaged public and audiences to take? What are the toolkits that we can give you to create, to help people better understand this work? And so I think that's the biggest thing that we're all trying to do and work together on with the foundation is how does this all move forward together, right? And make consistent sense.
Mm-hmm. So you have worked with Catherine on this messaging, and in terms of your public relations, then what has that collaboration been like on your perspective, and what have you done and taken from that and used to further your work?
Well, it's been great. I mean, we've worked with Catherine, we've worked with Shadi, and actually many people in this room to get, it was a very collaborative process because as we've been hinting at, you can't do this in a vacuum. It's also be very silly and odd given all of the years of experience that so many people have working on this issue to not really listen to what you have to say, maybe push you a little bit into thinking about new things and trying new things, but a collective effort because Catherine just said it, if we're not really working together, if we're not integrated, we're not going to be successful at this. And listening to the rest of the panel talk about how there is that synergy, and there truly is, and that's what I'm excited about. And I think the synergy came from a process that really was about hearing from people. So we've met with why they're doing the legacy work, hearing their messaging. We had a different frame in mind that I still think is a good frame, but it wasn't quite where we needed to be. Hearing the legacy work made us realize we needed to maybe pull back a little bit, and it really focuses on that 1090. And that seemed to really click then as we went back to the field and asked people for their feedback and their recommendations, and that's where we landed with Mistakes Kids Made. So it was a very collaborative process that sequentially took us to where we are today, which was good. I mean, there are times, I've been wanting to work on this issue since 2010, so I've been really eager to get started, but taking the time to really hear from folks put us in the right place. And I think as Shadi said this, storytelling is really effective because it makes people understand their consequences to issues, and it puts a face to those consequences. It gets them to actually care about the issue. But when done right, and right being when it's done in an integrated way where we're connected to other communications efforts, but also advocacy efforts and legislative efforts, and we're really pushing people, we can push people for change. We can really compel them to actually take some action. And that's what we're really focused on. And I think the synergy with the different efforts and working with MacArthur and working with people in the room, it's allowing us to do that. So, I'm not naive to think that someone passes on a video, we've won the day. But I think if someone passes on the video, if they take action on a site, if we can, the pivot strategy we have is about taking reports, more traditional content, and talking about solutions. And if we can work with all of you and thinking about new reports and new content to put together, et cetera, all of that can really build up to greater awareness, but also action eventually. And we're not going to be the only ones taking action. We need to work with you to figure out what that next action is. But it's exciting, and I feel like the collaboration of the last year is only going to put us in a great place for collaboration, and not just with the folks sitting on this panel and the people we've talked to, but hopefully with all of you, to really make this, as Catherine said, an exciting time to really do something, take the lessons from the past, the reform efforts from now, and thinking about what's going to move ahead, and how do we tell the stories of our work together to make more people get this issue, realize that it's not just a problem, but that's something we can actually do something about.
Thanks. Shadi, do you want to follow up on your collaboration with Hathaway?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always, when a movement is ready to have a shared message, is a really exciting time for a movement. I think it means that there's kind of a readiness there. There's enough work that's been done, there's enough evidence that's been done, and there really is a common narrative. And I think that is particularly exciting. It means that this can become something that moves beyond the work that you're working on within your community or within your state to one that is something that has national relevance and has a consistent umbrella message that is nationally relevant. And that is really, really exciting. For the film to be coming out right around the same time of all of this, I think is even more exciting, where it kind of gives people this understanding of, it kind of brings to life what that message means. I think a lot about the data that really drives the work that's done in this room. And data is really effective with certain audiences, but for others, it's not always going to do what you want it to do on its own. When it's coupled with a story, when it's coupled with storytelling, it can really help kind of crystallize why this stuff is important. And I think that kind of coupled with the messaging can be a really powerful moment. And to build upon something that Leslie mentioned, again, the action piece is also an important one. We're talking a lot about raising the profile of this and making it more, raising more awareness. Of course, that is effective only in conjunction with the work that's being done and helping identify opportunities for various audiences, various players to take actions, to take steps that can also help advance the work forward. So as we think about the way the film will be used, one of the things is that we really want to sit closely with folks like you who are doing this work to think about, okay, what are some very measurable objectives that you are working toward in the next few months, and how can a story help you get there? And it's a process, and there's an art to it, but it also is about thinking about, well, could you use this as a way to bring in a decision maker that hasn't been a part of the conversation? Could this be an opportunity to spark new alliances with, it was really great to hear about the alliances with the university and how effective that's been in advancing the work forward. Maybe this can be an opportunity to kind of pull in that relationship. So we really want to think carefully about how this can be, how we can use the hearts and minds piece of this to pull in those who may not necessarily know yet that they have a stake in these issues.
So could we maybe talk about some specific examples or strategies that we could share with our community? Like these folks who may not do communications on a regular basis, what could we give to them that they could take away from this and say, I can go back to my state, my county, my office and do something sort of in a concrete manner right away?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a couple things. I mean, I think that going to Shadi and Leslie after this panel and saying, we want to be active partners in the film, or we want to be active partners in the campaign. I think there's also, just the general housekeeping work that we always have to do to become powerful communicators. And some of that has to do with prioritizing audiences. Again, the great panel from Louisiana pointed out, your audience is always changing. People are getting reelected, people are losing elections, people are moving on, people are retiring, people are coming into the system. And so as tired as you all are sometimes of this conversation, and where is our progress and where is it now, I think we all have to remember that and also prioritize who we want to talk to based on what we want them to do. Which is an important, real distinction for the work I think that Shadi and Leslie are doing in terms of if we are trying to reach members of the engaged public, right? People who are curious or maybe think about this because they saw it on the front page of the paper, last Thursday and they kind of remember it, then getting involved with a campaign like Mistakes Kids Make and going there and finding out more information is really interesting and powerful. If you are already predisposed to some sort of social justice and watch documentaries in your Netflix queue and saw it in Convenient Truth and are looking for other ways to make and take action, then finding those audiences amongst your own work in your own community and directing them to the film is a great way for you to go. So I think that at this moment, most things are not ready for launch fully, but there are practical solutions that you can do in terms of talking to Leslie and Shadi about next steps forward. I think within the context of better telling the model's story, moving forward, one of the biggest things that we're going to come and ask you for, it's not necessarily a step forward you can take, but it is a step forward we're going to take to you, is to keep probing for the success stories. The stories of the kids in your community, the kids of the activists in your community, the stories of the partnerships and alliances that were formed, because that is the one way to break through all of this clutter and to kind of find your way in that ant trail is to make sure that we can make it visual in people's minds. So
yeah. Ray, can I just add to that?
Sure.
So just to reiterate, I think the first thing to do is to sign up with us to a couple things. I'm not assuming you're going to sign up to do everything we ask you to do, and I haven't given you a ton of information yet. So I have two colleagues here, and we're going to be hanging out after the panel, and we'd love you to sign up, one, to hear more about our strategy, because we're preparing to try to launch at the end of January. And we're going to need a lot of help in a couple different ways. So Mistakes Kids Make, as I mentioned, is really going to be contingent upon our success in reaching people through social networks, as well as reaching new partners, affinity groups, as I mentioned. So I want you to hear more about that, how to help us tap into your list, how to help us tap into relationships you might have, even just to get you a little bit more engaged and working on that piece of the campaign with us. And then the second thing we want to tell you about is more about the pivot strategies, and we have a couple of reports that we're already underway and working with some folks in the room on them. So that our goal is to have something every month. That might be something big, it could be something small, depending on where we are, but something that's rolling out on both sides on the Mistakes Kids Make as well as on the pivot, so that we always have something new that we can be doing. And so we want to tell you about both of those things and see then how you can more specifically get engaged. And I think the other concrete thing in general, not to make a plug for M&R, but I think storytelling is always a very frustrating part for organizations that I work with, at least, and it seems really complicated and difficult to do, and I think people put way too much pressure on themselves to try to figure out how to do it effectively. So we, in the beginning of the year, we're going to be releasing a white paper on storytelling and probably doing a webinar about it. So when you sign up, you can also put your name on the list because we would love to help you think through a little bit more clearly. How do you actually identify a good story? How do you put it out there? What are different ways of doing it? And so if one or both are helpful for you, we would love to share that information.
So those of us of a certain age can be a little intimidated by the social media and all of the different social media applications that are out there. If we could just, for a few minutes talk about those, what we should be doing with them, how they can help us, and what the heck is a Pinterest, and should we be using one? Or tweeting, or...
There's a great, we can send it around, there's a great picture that became a viral thing on the internet that described all of the social media platforms in sort of one sentence each. So, Pinterest is what you like to look at, Google Plus and Foursquare where you wanted to be, Twitter was, what you were doing right that moment, Facebook was what your kids were doing right that moment, and so on and so forth. Social media should not be intimidating at all. If I had my phone up here, I'd probably take a picture of you and put it on the Twitter page and encourage you to use the hashtag, which is the new thing to do. But it is, again, about audience, and where you find these people. There are very strong demographic leanings within social media, and also and the purpose behind them. So if you are an organization that spends a lot of time talking to your local media, you probably want to be on Twitter, because every journalist in the world has now figured out that they have to tweet to keep their job, and they have to blog to keep their job, and so that's where they are. If you want to talk to a rising demographic of 45-plus-year-old women who post things, go to Pinterest and Facebook, which progressively gets older and older. If you want to talk to nerdy computer guys who never leave the house, then get on Google Plus, because that's the only people that are using Google Plus as developers. But also just thinking about the social media aspects for the different campaigns and these pieces, they are things we're never going back. The world communicates in 140 characters now, because there are 70 million people who are the rising generation, and this is how they've learned to communicate. So it may scare you, but get used to it, because they're not going back, and so therefore neither can we, would be my pitch for it.
And I would say that's definitely true. And I'm used to working with long-form documentaries, and in my field, there's a lot of kind of disgruntledness about whether long-form film is dead, and it's not. I think there is a unique opportunity that long-form film presents in that it can bring together an audience of people to really kind of understand a complex and nuanced issue and allow for people to deliberate from there. I think the online space creates additional opportunities for video to live on and to engage the generation that is really used to living and breathing in 140 characters. In that context, I think video is really great at being linked to very direct actions that people can take, and kind of getting people kind of quickly engaged and involved in giving them something to do. And I think we're going to be looking at ways that we can kind of use these platforms to kind of take advantage of those various actions and contexts that that work really well for storytelling in the online space.
So Lori's giving me my cue here, and I want to just say, how do we connect the dots? What would you like to leave this audience with in your final 30 seconds?
I'm going to say sign up again, because I think that's going to be really key. I think sign up and also be excited and be willing to try something different. I think that's, again, our success is not just about having something that we feel good about at the end, but we want all of you to feel good about it, and we want to actually do something. So if you could work with us and be willing to try and experiment with new things and take some risks and learn along the way with us, that would be not only hugely helpful, but I think it will actually put us in a really good position to be successful. Not just me or M&R, but all of us together.
Catherine?
Take one more risk. That going into this communications world is a bold one and is a little scary, and But take it, because if working together under some consistent messaging with some priority audiences and working in all the different platforms that we need to be working on, we can actually do this.
And I would say it would be to find opportunities to tell stories. And it's great that M&R's got a toolkit coming out on helping that. I think everyone in this room can recall a story that motivated them to do what they do. And I think those are things to really think about. Anytime you're giving a presentation, anytime you're engaging a new group, try to start it out with a story. And there's a toolkit that can help you kind of think that through if that feels a little intimidating. But it's a great way to connect with people and can be very effective. Just very quick on the film campaign. It doesn't have a secured distribution yet. It's going to be going through film festivals in 2013. As that's happening, we're going to be identifying partners to do some pilot activities and developing tools. You will certainly be hearing about it because, again, we want to work with you to ensure that what's being done with the film is integrated with what you're doing, and we will be in touch about that.
Please join me in thanking our panel.